Hello, everybody. Greg Underdahl here, and can you believe it? It's episode 12. I'm talking with the man today, Jason Mitchell. He is a fishing celebrity in the Northland. Everybody knows Jason and respects what he has to say. He's an exceptional multi-species angler, and I'm really excited to talk with him. Let's get started.
This isn't another fishing podcast. This is another fishing podcast.
Jason, my man, it's been a minute, as they say, since we've seen each other. I think the last time I saw you was at the St. Paul Ice Show. I don't know when that was. Gosh, was that 2 years ago? Because we didn't.
Probably,
it seems like
maybe even more, 2 or 3 years. It's been a little while.
Yeah, we had a good discussion about all things fishing. Even got into the political realm, which I know we're not afraid to go down. I don't know if we need to do that with this podcast, but yeah, it's we should probably talk about how we know each other. Kind of, I like to call it the origin story, if you will. Any of the guests I have on, I typically like to just kind of go through how we know each other, our history. But we worked together. I think I either met you through The Next Bite. I was the videographer for The Next Bite, or it was. I think what it actually was filming Ice Team, Clam Ice Team episodes. That sound right to you?
Yeah, I think so. We were up at Lake of the Woods, I think, and then just when you guys were doing stuff with Gary and Keith, and that's
that's how I got to meet you, and I've always, I think it's funny how. Celebrity, whether it be in Hollywood or even in our industry, celebrity, you're a celebrity. I mean, you're probably one of the biggest celebrities we've had. This is podcast episode number 12, by the way, Jason. We're really cooking with this podcast. But you are one of the bigger names, and I think all a celebrity is nonsense, quite frankly, but you are.
There, I can tell you that.
What's that?
I don't know the goal there because.
But you have a fishing show, Jason Mitchell Outdoors, and you've been in the fishing industry a long time. You're very well respected. You have a signature line of products with Clam. And very well respected in the fishing industry. You're primarily known as a multi-species guy, though, right? You started guiding. That's how you got into the industry, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guided for many years. I guess most of my time I spent walleye fishing. As a guide on Devil's Lake, walleyes made the world go round, and then obviously, there's some other species to target as well that we did. If the walleye fishing was tough, or if the walleye fishing was really good, and people wanted to try something different. But I like to fish for everything. I love to fish for bass. I'll even fish for carp. I don't care.
Yep.
I just love fishing, and I've always shaking my head at people that I guess you call them, fish snobs, where they think there's one species of fish and that alone, and everything else is trash. And I've never met a fish I didn't like. But one thing I will say though is that what I really find enjoyment is if I'm fishing for a fish and I can figure that fish out, and then I can put that together, and then I find real satisfaction and enjoyment from that. So if I'm fishing for carp and I figure that out, I'm like, wow, this is really cool. Well, that's one thing. Or but if I'm out walleye fishing and catch a huge drum by accident, well, that's not the same for me. If somebody put a gun in my head and told me to catch a drum on purpose, I wouldn't even know where to start, right?
Right,
so
right.
If I catch a big smallmouth running a bottom bouncer in a chub walleye fishing, yeah, it's cool, but it's not the same as if I'm trying to target that fish. Catching a muskie when you're walleye fishing, it's not quite the same as when you're trying to catch it. So I like to try to catch them on purpose, and I'll fish for anything on purpose. So
that's really interesting. I don't know that I've thought of it in those terms, but that's a great way to put it. What do you think that is? It's like if you're trying to figure out a puzzle, right? If you're trying to figure out a puzzle, which let's say the puzzle is the walleye, all right? So that's your targeted species for the day. And so you catch a big 40-pound carp, just a Mongo carp.
Cool. It's not the same to me. That's just me.
No. And I get it. I think I probably kind of fall in that too. Like, I love catching everything, but when you're targeting a species, it is something like you're putting all your effort into one species, and then if you catch something different, it's not like, oh my God, it's the end of the world, of course. But it is something that's like, it's like you've solved another puzzle on accident or something, or it's I don't know what it is. Like so it doesn't have, because it was accidental, it doesn't have the same kind of a sense of accomplishment or something like that.
I'll give you an example. I just got on a really cool crappie bite on Devil's Lake, and I was actually looking for walleyes, and, I've caught crappies in this area before, but goodness, started out fishing for walleyes, and by the end of the day, you're, targeting crappies. And so, I'll flip-flop in a heartbeat. If I'm going along a weed line, for example, and thinking, boy, this is where the walleye should be, and it's just jammed up with smallmouths, I'll switch mentalities in a heartbeat. But just for me, I like to figure things out. I consider myself a student of fishing. No matter what you learn, no matter how much you think you fish, you go to a new body of water and just everything gets flipped on its head. Or even lakes, water you fish your whole life, things change from year to year. And I just love figuring those things out. I love figuring out patterns, and to me, that's really what drives me. As far as keeping a limit of fish or whatever, that really doesn't mean anything to me. I'll keep fish to eat, and when I guided, obviously that was important. People wanted to have catch their limit, whatever. But I just love figuring out fish, especially if it's kind of maybe something that if everybody's zigging and then you zag, if everybody thinks that the fish are deep and you figure out a neat pattern that's shallow, and maybe a lot of people don't think the fish should be shallow, or vice versa. Like right now in the spring, it's shallow, and boy, I've caught a lot of fish deep in the spring, and so, I love when I can try to figure out something that you feel like, you're the only boy on the spot, and you feel like you're the only person that knows about it, at least for that day or that moment, and you kind of feel like you figured it out on your own.
For sure.
Obviously, we all rely on networking. We all get all kinds of information, and I'll take all the help I can get. But I just love to go out and try to figure those fish out. Not always do that, but that's my goal, So.
Oh, for sure. I'm curious, how did you get your start, in fishing? What was it that just lit your fire? What age was that? Just go through your your love of fishing, when that was kindled, if you will.
I've been obsessed with fishing my whole life. Even when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, that's all I wanted to do was fish. And, and when I was a kid, I would ride my bike down to the river. Growing up in Minot, North Dakota, I'd ride my bike down the river every chance I got. And, a lot of times I'm fishing for bullheads or suckers. There was some pumpkin seed sunfish. I remember just catching a 3-pound northern pike out of the river was a really big deal. And then obviously, the walleye mania, if you will, in the Dakotas, walleyes were the only fish. And I guess I got started or cut my teeth on a lot more humble beginnings. And then obviously, we started, especially in the 80s, people just learned a lot more about walleye fishing. And I think the average angler got a lot better at walleye fishing, through the mid to late 80s. I can still remember as a kid, when most people all wanted to catch walleyes, but there's just a handful of people that you look at that really had it figured out. The rest of us are just kind of struggling, hoping, And I just remember that, basically that just that groundswell of information and just knowledge, and now you look, how many people are good walleye anglers. It's astronomical. But I can remember a time when there weren't nearly as many. And I can remember, in even junior high age, high school, and getting a boat and just walleye fishing. And I went through the sob stage. I was in an area where the only fish that mattered was a walleye, and catching a really big smallmouth by accident on a live bait rig or whatever, or catching a big pike trolling crankbaits or whatever, and almost kind of looking like, just staying, like, this fish interrupted my day. I got to get back to walleye fishing. And then I guess as I got older, and maybe got a little bit more experience, I just realized how ridiculous that is, and then I started to meet some people too that were really good walleye anglers that maybe got tired of doing what everybody else is doing, and they started fishing little lakes in North Dakota. They started doing some under the radar things that, they would go bass fishing, and just fish for something, that wasn't a walleye, and just kind of being intrigued by that, and so I kind of got hooked on some of that stuff too. So I don't discriminate. I like to fish for anything, So
Yeah, I'm the same way. I appreciate that. How did you transition into guiding? When was that, and how did you make that jump?
Yeah, So as a young person, I didn't really have a lot going for me. I went into the Army Reserves, and I remember, graduating high school, went into basic training right away, and then came back, and then I had to do some college classes, and then had to do some drills and stuff, and it wasn't really college material. I dabbled around in college for, I think, 4 years, but I never got a degree, kind of bounced around some different. I just, really didn't find my fit. All I wanted to do was fish, and part of the reason I didn't do good in any schools that I was just fishing all the time. I would work way more than I should so that I could fish way more than I should, and in school just didn't get any attention whatsoever. I was a terrible student, and and I was just crazy about fishing. So then I lived in Bismarck for, I think, like a year, and fishing all the time down there where it interfered with my job and stuff. And then I got to know some of the people up at Devil's Lake, and started coming up there and guiding waterfowl hunting on the weekends. And then I just hated my job and kind of hated where I was in life so much. I thought, I loaded up everything I owned into a 17.5-foot tiller boat and moved up there. And at first I lived in a camper next to the lake, that somebody let me live in, and started guiding. And this is just in its infancy. There was just a couple of guides on the lake, and there was, hardly any. There was one resort. There was hardly anything really going on. It was just starting. So I was kind of really in the right place at the right time more than anything. And, I would just guiding. I remember just taking people out for half days, just thinking, wow, if I can just guide 3 or 4 days a week, and then I'll just help her out around the bait shop, mow grass or haul up fish guts, whatever I need to do just to make myself useful so they'll keep me around. I'll be happy. And one thing led to another, and within a year I was pretty much going every day. It was just in demand. I was on a lake that had changed dramatically, and it was kind of intimidating. It was big. It was a hot walleye fishery, at least in the open water, and we had the perch and walleye fishing stuff going on in the wintertime. And people would, it was a place where people went to. A lot of times they wanted to hire a guide, whether it was for the whole entirety of their trip, or at least the first day, just to get kind of a bearing of what's happening. It was such different fishing than a lot of the stuff that was happening in northern Minnesota and some of the other destinations at the time. And so, it was just kind of ripe for the plucking. And so pretty soon I was guiding every day. Pretty soon I was taking out 2 groups a day sometimes. Some of those, I was young, I was ambitious, I was like a crackhead,
Yeah, it's an addiction.
And so, I was putting on long days on the water, and, and just pretty soon then we started adding guides, and then, kind of the rest is history. But it was just kind of a perfect place and timing because, I was young, right? And so, there's a lot of things I didn't know. There's a lot of things I screwed up on. There's a lot of mistakes that I made.
Like how old were you around this time?
21. 21, and then 20. By the time I was 22, I was pretty much full bore. That's all I did was guide every day. And, I'd take a few days off just to try to keep up. That was one of the mistakes I made when I was young, is that I probably should have taken more days off. I should have taken, a month or 2 off. I should have taken like a 3-day hiatus off every month just to keep up with my equipment and make sure that my boat was in order. And, you start going every day. And, there's times, when I was young where I didn't know when to turn the switch off. And, pretty soon your boat's dirty and messy. And, you got line and pop bottles shoved in a compartment somewhere. And now that I've gotten older, I just slow down and I don't, I make sure that, everything is up to snuff, but when I was young, I didn't, maybe necessarily realize that. So I had to learn a lot, but I remember being young and the fishing was so different on Devil's Lake, and we were figuring it out too, because the lake was changing so much when the lake was coming up, at that time, 3,
right.
4, 5 feet a year,
Yeah. Talk about that a little bit. That's such a strange lake. And I've done quite a few shoots on Devil's Lake. The water table is just rising at Devil's Lake. So really, I think it's interesting. I think what you're saying, you owe a lot of your success, your career, to Devil's Lake, and just the fact that you hit it right when it was all that, that water was rising, all that stuff flooding. It's like a reservoir, a young reservoir too. And there seems to be just a boom in productivity with young reservoirs, all that new nutrients and. But go into like what they think's happening there with why it was flooding.
It's an interesting story, and I knew it as soon as I saw it, how special it was. I mean, I was, again, I was like a crackhead when it came to fishing. I mean, I if there was anything about fishing, I read it, right? And so even, like fish biology and stuff like that, I mean, I'm pretty familiar with a lot of that stuff because it's all I've ever been obsessed with my whole life. I mean, like I've never golfed. All I've ever done is fish, and if I'm fishing, I'm thinking about fishing or reading about fishing or whatever. And so, I remember, growing up on Lake Sakakawea fishing, and, we seen some drought years in the 80s when the lake really dried up and got low, and then the fishing got tough. Well, then the water came back up, and it floods all that terrestrial vegetation and stuff. And then pretty soon you have these phenomenal year classes, and you've got this bump in forage where you have these, great growth rates. And it's like using rocket fuel, like a high octane gas on an ecosystem. And, biologists, they have fancier terms for that, but basically that carbon breaks down when you add water to it, and it's just really productive. And so I seen that happening on Devil's Lake, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is special because this is going to last for a long time. And what's interesting is that the lake's been doing this for thousands of years, since the last glaciers, right, which were 10,000 years ago. And it seems to be about a 100 to 150 year cycle where in the late 1800s, when the first European settlers started settling around Devil's Lake, the lake was high like it is today. And then by the early 1900s, it was almost dried up. And so like in the 1930s, that was the Dust Bowl years on the prairie, right, or on the Great Plains. And the lake was almost dried up. And it's just, I don't know, just what people knew at the time, when the lake dried up, they settled the land, and so the land is deeded. And so that's one of the interesting things about Devil's Lake is you take a lake, the deeds around a lake, like say shoreline property on most lakes, and you have a meandering shoreline where everybody's deed meets in the middle, almost like a pie chart. Okay, Devil's Lake, I mean, like Minnewacan Flats, there's quarters of land, sections of land that was ranch land, is owned by somebody. And so, early 1900s, the lake was practically dried up, and then in the 50s, 60s, the water started to come back a little bit, and started to flood some land, but not a lot, right? And that was kind of what was considered the historical Devil's Lake Basin, when the main lake was maybe 20 feet deep. And the Minnewacan Flats was like 5, 6, 7 feet deep. And there was roads built around the lake. There was farms. I mean, there were some farms that had been there for, almost 75, 80 years.
Wow.
Think about that. I mean, some of that stuff was farmsteaded, homesteaded in the late 1800s, and now you get into 1990, 1993 is when the water started to come up. We had a wet summer that year with a lot of rain, and then we just started having a wet cycle. And so it's had this ebbs and flows for but it seems like it's on a 100 to 150 year cycle. Well, people, this country's only been settled for the last 120 years.
Right. Right.
People just didn't know, and so the lake came back. I remember as a kid, people talking about Devil's Lake, and they'd be some farmer would point to some distant shoreline, and that used to be where the old lake shoreline used to be. And when you're 10 years old, 100 years seems like the last ice age, right?
Right, of course.
It's just a blink when you look at how
for
short
sure
that is. But I mean, I never imagined the lake would come back, but we should have, right? I mean, it's like, what were we thinking? Of course it's going to come back.
Right.
And just like, there's going to come a time when this lake is going to dry up again, too.
Right,
it's going to take a lot longer because the surrounding watershed's different. Water drains into the lake a lot faster versus pre-settlement,
Right.
You don't have the holding capacity and the grasslands and the wetlands and things like it used to with the roads and the, farm fields and things like that. But, the lake is going to get low again, too.
Right.
And so what's interesting is in the late 1800s, from what I can gather just from historical accounts, is that there was a lot of pike in the lake, and then there was white suckers. And there were so many pike in the lake, actually, that they used to ship them by rail back to Chicago, in the early days. And they figured that those fish got in through the Rock Lake Basin when the water was high, because what's unique about Devil's Lake is it's a closed basin. There's no water coming in or going out. And that's why it has such a low diversity of fish. Like, I can't tell you how many times people will be like, well, where are the bluegills end up? Oh, there aren't any bluegills.
Wow.
Well, that's like I was an idiot because I didn't know where the bluegills were.
I had no idea. That's news to me. Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah, there's there's been a couple bass caught over the years, largemouths and smallmouths, that they figure got washed in during flood years from like Bisbee Dam, which is basically in the same watershed, but it's a dam, up by Candu that's maybe 30 miles from Devil's Lake proper, although it basically runs into the Mabe Coulee system. So there's been a few oddball fish that have showed up, but when the water was coming, so at one time there was no fish in Devil's Lake, obviously, when it practically dried up. And what's interesting is, in the early days, the Fish and Wildlife Service used to put fish all over. It was really kind of and again, it was a different time, right? But they would put fish fry in cream cans and put them on trains, and that's
wow.
how, carp were one of the most stocked fish in North America in the 1800s. They put them everywhere, And so at one time there was documentation of channel catfish and largemouth bass that got dumped in Devil's Lake. Well, they didn't make it. They didn't survive,
wow.
right?
Huh.
But then the water started coming up in the 60s, and then they put northern pike in the lake, and they were small, and the salinity levels were really high. The water quality was really low. You couldn't drink the water. You couldn't use it for irrigation.
Because there's nothing draining out of it. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
It's the groundwater that I guess keeps it from just becoming salty.
Well, yeah, so when the water's low, the mineral content is through the roof. And so it's kind of, I've read that the only lake that's really like it on this scale is the Great Salt Lake in Utah, where, I remember even being younger on a windy day, the floor of your boat would be just white. Your clothes would be white from the alkali. Water would dry out. And so the water quality was really poor. And so the fish actually couldn't reproduce at first because the water quality was so poor. So they would stock the pike in, and then they'd have to stock more pike in. Well, then when the water came up, the water quality improved dramatically. And so that was the other thing. So you're flooding terrestrial vegetation, and then your water quality is improving. Even from west to east, the water quality is a lot better on the west end of the lake than it is on the far east end of the lake.
Oh, no kidding.
So, because that's where a lot of the water is coming in. The water coming in is better. It's snow melt and rain, whatever. And so it's really a fascinating fishery that way. And I think what makes it so cool and special and unique right now is that we're in a time in this world where we'll never see eminent domain again in this country, right? We'll never see these new reservoirs being built, whether it's the preservation mindset where, in a lot of places in the country, they're trying to get rid of dams, to restore native fish runs and fish populations that were there, say, pre-dam or pre-settlement. And you look at what happened in this country from say the 1940s through the 1960s, all the public work projects that happened where they created all these reservoirs, right? And there are things that as an angler, we all enjoy, whether it's Bull Shoals or Pickwick or the TVA,
right,
through Alabama, right? And you got the Missouri River systems, even the stuff on the Mississippi River, and think about that. What an incredible time that was, where you have all these lakes, like the Ozark reservoirs, when
right,
those were all new,
the White River.
Yeah, and you look at all that water, and you've got all those trees that were flooded, and you've got these, the environment completely changed. Where all that was one of the reasons that the largemouth bass exploded in North America, and the popularity of it is that all the change in habitat. You went from these river environments where you have sturgeon and sailors and catfish and paddlefish to a reservoir with flooded timber and everything else, and you have this explosion. Well, when these reservoirs are new, the productivity is off the charts. And so some of these records in some of these states will never be broken because we'll never see an environment like that again. Right. And so to have this type of environment in North America today is pretty special because, we're gone past those days. I mean, there's so much almost resentment against public domain, or where there was a time, for example, people farmed along the Missouri River where somebody knocked on your door and said, "Hey, for the good of the public and good of the country, we're taking your land. You're going to have to move, and here's a check. Here's what we think it's worth."
Wow,
well,
that's
no,
something.
I want to sell it. No, you don't have a choice. Think about that.
It's pretty amazing.
That is. And so, in with farm groups in the Dakotas and stuff, there's such a pushback against that now that, the governor has to sign off on that stuff, and that just doesn't happen anymore.
Sure.
So we'll never see that again. We'll never see new reservoirs and new, at least I can't see it in, next 100 years. Obviously can't in the future, but it's a different climate today in this country.
And so how much is Devil's Lake is continuing to the levels continuing to go up on Devil's Lake? It's not slowing down, or?
No, it has slowed down. So since 1993, it tripled in size. It was, I want to say 80,000 acres, and now it's everything connected. It's over 200,000 acres of water that fish can live in or get to from Devil's Lake.
Wow!
And the last three years, it's actually dropped, and so it was at its high. I don't remember what the elevation was at the height, but it's probably, it's got to be 4 feet, 5 feet lower than the high. And so it's, relatively speaking, it's still really high, but it's not, it's actually seemed to be going the other way now.
Okay. So you're guiding, going back to your early career, you're guiding a ton, and you're getting a reputation. People are learning, Jason's kicking butt up at Devil's Lake, and he's the guide to go to. It kind of, your story reminds me a lot, especially your addiction, that you need your fix. It reminds me a lot of Pete Mayna's origin story, guiding a ton, just getting off the water, just addicted to fishing, getting off the water late, and then driving, home and seeing all kinds of wildlife moving around, and he turns the boat around, gets back on the water because he thinks there's a feed window going on, So it's very similar, and I love that about fishing, in fishermen that they're just eating up with it, because I get it. I don't know what it is. Well, I kind of know what it is. It's just, there's something about the bite. There's something about figuring out that tap. That tap is the indicator. Okay, this could be on now, and then you set the hook and the whole thing, being connected to a living creature through the rod and the line and all this. There's being out in the elements. And if you love weather, fishing's great too. There's all this stuff. There's so much involved with fishing. That's why I love it. But so you're up in North Dakota guiding, and you're getting a reputation. Tell me about the transition from you guiding to being noticed, getting a TV show, and everything that's come with that.
Yeah, so I was guiding, and obviously one of the things that I kind of figured out, and I'm not saying it happened overnight, but to really be successful guiding, there's certain things you have to do and certain things to avoid. You have to avoid any type of drama or conflict. Okay, you're going to have people that are, they see in a spot, then you go there the next day and there's 2 boats sitting right where you were, and that they're there because they saw you there, and that's fine. And I just, or some people have kind of I guess almost like a selfish mentality where if they can't see the direct benefit to them right then and there, they're not helpful. They don't have the time of day for people. I've heard that from guys well, they'll never hire me. I ain't telling them nothing. I ain't showing them nothing, whatever. And, there's some local pushback, right? Where there's, people that live around you that don't want you guiding at all because they don't want people coming in and catching their fish, And so there's a lot of different nuances, as far as living in a community and making a living fishing, And I guess one of the things that I figured out is, you just kill people with kindness. Just try to do right by people. So if somebody pulls up and they're fishing right next to you, and they're right next to you, just, hey, how's it going? And just start talking to them,
Yeah.
And what I found is that really, really benefited me because, you can't win if there's any kind of a confrontation. You don't win because when that person goes back to the bar, goes back to the restaurant, wherever, they don't ever say, yeah, he'd been fishing there for 4 days in a row, and I got up at 5 a.m. this morning to make sure that I was there first just to see what he'd do.
Right.
They're never going to paint themselves in a bad.
No.
Right? You always lose,
it's always
right?
biased.
You just kill people with kindness and try to be decent people. And what I found is that the more I gave, the more I got back. Okay, and so I would be helpful to people. I seen somebody at the boat ramp or whatever. I would tell them enough to at least get them going. I might not tell them exactly where I planned to fish that day, but I'd tell them where maybe I caught fish a couple of days ago where I knew there was still fish. I would tell them enough to, to help them. And it seemed like the more I helped people, the more I got helped, right? And sometimes there's people that will never hire a guide. That's just not their thing. They've got their boat and whatever, but they would go home and they would show people fish pictures, and people like, wow, I want to go up there. Is there a guide up there? Well, then they would recommend me. Or if I would have chewed the guy out, they would have never recommended me. So I just felt like, you just build those relationships with people and try to do good by people. It comes back tenfold. And it's funny because as things kind of progress along, I can't tell you all the help I got, right? Where I would get, I can remember times where I would just help somebody. I would run into somebody at the bait shop and they would be getting bait they'd be getting a bunch of minnows, and they're asking if we had any shiners, which, we don't have shiners here, right? They're not native. They're not, and actually, most days I don't even have fathead minnows in the boat because we're running leeches, we're running gulp, we're running plastics, and it's a different deal than, say, northern Minnesota or whatever. So these people would show up with mono rods and jigs, and they're looking for their shiners, and they're thinking they're going to fish it just the way they do Winnie or Leech Lake or Mille Lacs, And I would just spend a few minutes with them, kind of showing them what to do, and using leeches and jigs, and just so that they had a chance, or how to use braided line and whatever. And I mean, it took 5 minutes of my time just in passing, right? Just hi, just being friendly, and then a week later, there'd be like an envelope in my mailbox at the bait shop, and there'd be a waypoints. They just counted and so you get lucky a lot when you treat people right, or just try to do good by people, and then we realized too that the more we could teach and the more we could help, the better Devil's Lake looked, right? And so you have people coming to Devil's Lake for the first time, and it is such a different, unique system compared to a lot of traditional walleye fishing destinations that people traveled to at the time. If we could get, help people, just by teaching people, as far as what to do, where to go, what to use, then it really helped our business dramatically, because then it gave us the perception as being experts or opinion leaders, right? And so back in the day, before social media, it was a lot of articles, it was a lot of photo shoots and things like that, where we started, syndicating a lot of articles, and then all of a sudden, realize that, well, you don't really make money writing articles. It's not like Outdoor Life pays you anything, or in Fisherman or whatever. I mean, it's less than $1,000, no matter who you write for, right? And so you can't make a living doing that. But if you have a business that you're promoting on the side really softly, your phone's going to ring as a guide, right?
Right.
I mean, people are going to pick that magazine up and read it and want to experience it themselves, and they hire us for 3 days. Well, that's all of a sudden you've got 5 people showing up with this group, and it's a $6,000 fishing package,
there you go,
including lodging and the meals and everything. And so realized that was really a viable thing for us to do. And so we did a lot of that stuff. And so we just got involved with media. Well, then pretty soon we got involved with different sponsorship opportunities, because people wanted us using certain things or talking about certain things. And then it kind of escalated. And I guess how I got into television, I'd filmed quite a few TV shows with different people, and I met some great people. I mean, people that I looked up to my whole life, whether it's like Doug Stange from In Fisherman.
Oh man, he's my favorite outdoor writer ever.
Oh yeah, I mean, I love the the legend of him and the toad.
Oh my God, it's so cool, man. Because we're like, what's so cool, Jason? We're probably, I think we're about similar age, and my love of fishing was fueled by In Fisherman as a kid.
Yeah.
And I would read Doug Stange. Still this day, I think he's no doubt my favorite outdoor writer. He would spin the yarns of his escapades with Otis Toad Smith for Channel Cats, and some Iowa river. I mean, it reminded me of fishing with my bud, when I'd come to Minnesota, southern Minnesota in the summers. He had a great way of just really encapsulating in his writing just the wonder and just all that fishing is, like I mean, Doug can be very technical, but he also can, he's just a wonderful storyteller.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And probably one of the most maybe underappreciated contributors to the winter ice fishing scene too, especially with walleye fishing. Obviously Gens, really pioneered and blew up the bluegill stuff and the crappies and the panfish, but I think it was Stange, that really helped put the walleye fishing, at least in the wintertime, to the forefront, using jigging wraps and things like that. I mean, Stange was way, way ahead of his time, and one of the first people to really do a good job of, getting people the right advice and then getting it out to the masses. So yeah, definitely a person left his mark. And so, I got to meet a lot of neat people through television, and filmed a lot of different shows. And then I filmed a lot of shows with Tony Dean, and Tony Dean and I we hit it off, became really good friends. And then he got to a point where he wanted to retire and slow down from television and put his focus on some other things, mostly, some conservation type projects. And so I got an opportunity to take a show over and then buy a show from him. And then, the plan was, I had a lot to learn with television. I didn't know what I didn't know. And the plan was we were going to do things together for the first couple of years. And then we were going to co-host shows together and do some things. And then he died unexpectedly. And so kind of had to learn on the fly, but that's how we end up in television, and it's what we're still doing today. So.
And, you kind of touched upon this a bit already, but someone who is, I've got some people that follow us that are younger, and they've asked me a few times, like, how do you get, how specifically they asked me how I got to do what I'm doing, in the fishing business as far as video production. But I think also, it would be helpful. What advice can you give a young person that wants to be a professional angler, do what you're doing, whether it be, guiding or just following their passion? They have this passion for fishing and they want to make it a career. What advice, and I think you already touched upon it a bit, you already gave some really great advice, but just kind of in a nutshell, what advice would you give a young angler that wants to do something like what you're doing?
Yeah, I get that question a lot too. And here's something that I really, really believe in is that, this industry is as much about people as it is about fishing. Okay, so you have to have those relationships, whether it's with the consumer or with the companies. It's kind of surprising where the fishing industry also can attract the wrong types of people. And I can spot a person that won't make it from a mile away. Okay, and the person that won't make it, and I've been in this industry a long time, but people that maybe have this ego or have this thing where it's all about them. Like if they you come to a sponsor and I'm the best fisherman ever and I do this and I catch so many fish and blah blah blah. And I always catch 6-pound bass whenever I go out, whatever it is, right? I mean everybody looks at that and like, well, boy, is that person an amateur? Because if you fish a lot, you're going to have your good moments and figure some things out. But there's so much more to it than that. And I always tell young people, put the industry and put the resource ahead of yourself. Okay, there's a lot of people that don't, right? There's people that'll kill a 52-inch muskie in a heartbeat if they think it can get a good photo, or they just put themselves ahead of everything. It's all about me, I'm the greatest fisherman ever. You just can't make it. This industry is too cruel, right? I mean, you're going to have a bullseye on your back when you're in this industry. This industry is too cruel. If it's just about you, you're not going to have enough people around you helping you paddle. Okay. And so make sure that you put the industry ahead of yourself, put the resource ahead of yourself, and do what's right by the industry in the sense. I mean, I love fishing. I mean, fishing has given me so much personally, professionally, business-wise, whatever. I mean, I have way more in life than I ever could have dreamed of. And, and fishing is just personal. And, what I mean by putting the industry ahead of yourself is that, always be honest with people. Okay. And it's not about you or your sponsors. It's about the industry. Okay. I'll give you some examples. I mean, there's times where I got to go down to Shields or wherever and do in-store deals where I meet people and talk to people about fishing. Okay. I am not going to sell that kid $150,000 or $150 fishing rod, right? After sizing him up, talking to his dad, he needs something that he can just, he's using a push button right now. He wants to get his first spinning rod. Okay. Make sure you let them know that you can catch all the fish you want on an ugly stick. And that's the truth, right? I mean, I've guided for years and people showed up with rhino rods or whatever. And there's never, CPs would have a heyday with a lot of our expenditures as far as rate of return on investment, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many times where somebody using the cheapest rods you could imagine caught all kinds of fish and people had all the fancy stuff, didn't catch hardly anything, right? I mean, that happens every day in the real world, and so tell people the truth.
Yeah. Amen.
Don't try to just sell something to somebody that they don't need or don't want, that they have no use for, just because you think that's going to make your sponsors happy or make you money. Just do right by people.
Amen.
Tell them,
I think that's so important, and I feel like you wouldn't like someone's asking for advice face to face. I mean, one would hope that someone, you wouldn't just lie to someone like that to their face, or a friend. Would you lie to your friend? I mean, if you're a dishonest person, it's not as hard. But if you're an honest person, I can't stand. Honestly, I get almost physically ill when I feel like I am being too pushy about something, or I've just tried to operate my life to be honest with people, because I would want, it's the golden rule, for crying out loud, and that pertains to if you're dealing with, like yourself, if you have a big platform, and you're reaching more people, then wow, it's even the responsibility for people that are moral and ethical.
Yeah.
The responsibility to be truthful and genuine and be honest is even greater. So I really appreciate about that. That about you. I think that's a hell of a character trait.
How common that is, though. I mean, think about how many times where, obviously with a TV show, we have sponsors, so, we'll be using a certain lure because that's a sponsor, right? And if a lure isn't a sponsor, then we probably don't get to put it on television. But, when you're just interacting with the people and trying to help people, like even like lures, right? In the real world, you're going to have tackle trays full of all kinds of different brands, right? I mean, if you're a walleye angler, for example, you're going to have shad wraps, you're going to have flicker shads, you're going to have reef runners, you're going to have all kinds of lures, and those are all companies that don't sponsor me, right? I have Selmo Strike King as a sponsor. Well, we've got some great lures too, and in the big scheme of things, is that all you can do is educate the consumer enough so whatever it is that you're pushing is one of their confidence baits, right? And so, if you're on Devil's Lake, you're going to want a tray of Hornets, number 4, number 5 Hornets, right? Number 6 is probably not so much, right? But you just tell people the truth. And it's amazing how people just, what rod should I use or what should I get, whatever. And it's just it's like they're talking party lines. It's like they just go right down the deal.
Right.
And it loses some integrity. It loses some truth, some value. And people think that they have to cling to that, especially when they're new in this industry. And I think what they find is that nobody believes them and they don't have any impact, right? And so it's not as effective. You think you're doing your sponsors a favor by just, saying whatever. And, if people don't believe you, well, you're dead. So just tell people the truth.
And I think I couldn't agree more. And I think the media landscape that we're in now, I was talking recently to someone about this. I think we're in a different era, like the YouTube generation. I'm beginning to wonder if there's been a shift, and obviously television's most likely will always be a player, but there's this alternative, and it's not such an alternative anymore, if we're being honest. YouTube is very much mainstream. And, the internet's mainstream.
Yeah. I mean, the younger crowd isn't watching television, at least the way we did growing up.
Right. And I really wonder if the younger generation, they have a really good BS detector or something. They when you think about where they've grown up after 9/11, around 9/11, the millennials and the Generation Z, and we're in this crazy. They've lived in a crazy climate, and I just wonder if they're done with the BS and they go to YouTube as like this is their. I've heard many stories about how big YouTubers have to keep things really raw because if they try to get too fancy, with wearing like a wireless mic or something like that, their audience will be turned off. So it's really interesting to see how things are changing, in that regard.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very authentic, right? I mean, they show, a lot of the really successful YouTubers, they show when they don't catch fish, they don't, they're very raw, very authentic, and it's believable, right? I mean, what you see is what you get. And I think there's a lot.
Not to cut you off, Jace, but I'll be completely honest with you. Some of it is just, in some of these big YouTubers, I can't even get through not even 2 minutes. Because I'm an old guy now, I guess, it's just like, oh my God, I can only watch so much GoPro chesty footage. But there's something, I guess this is how it happens, that transition. When I was younger, I was like, how do old people get so damn out of touch? And I'm like, oh, I get it now. I totally get it now,
I'm still listening to music from the 80s and 90s, and my kids, they'll play stuff. But, here's something too, is like, especially with I've got a 13-year-old and a 12-year-old, and I've got a younger one. But, my kids, if I just left them alone and didn't look over them, they would watch YouTube for 10 hours a day. I mean, it's like, get outside. We have to hide their phones. It's like they're addicted to their phones. We got to, kick them outside and take their phones away, and we have like you can only have your phone like this day for these hours, and then you're done. Otherwise they're on all the time.
Right.
They hide it, go to bed with it. Right. I mean, it's amazing. And so, it's a different world, and I think too, I mean, I think the future of fishing is bright. Just the stuff that's happened with COVID, and I think there's some good things that are happening from some of the YouTube stuff, especially because kids are getting inspired by it. I'm not cool anymore, right? I'm not cool to my kids, right? But like my kids love watching Flair. Because my son loves to trap and Flair's trapping coyotes or whatever, and that's not a bad role model, right? I mean, it's better than watching Cardi B or something like that.
Right. Right.
You have these younger people that are producing these YouTube videos and they're catching bass, they're hunting coyotes or whatever, and it's not too racy. It's not, it's probably a pretty good thing in the big scheme of things. But it's the biggest thing now is that there's never been a bigger difference or a bigger gulf between two different generations in how they get their media. Right. I mean, when I was a kid, if I wanted to watch the 10 o'clock news on a Friday night, I was watching the same news as my parents did, or I'd read the same Fisherman magazine or watch the same television show on TV. I mean, we all got our media from the same platforms, right? If we watched the Twins, we would watch it on television, whereas now we have young people that never subscribe to cable in their life. They'll probably never have television as we grew up with it or knew it. They're using Netflix. They're watching the Twins on their phones, right? Everything is on their phone, where it's just, I guess whatever you grow up with, so it's pretty fascinating to watch this, because I love fishing, but I also love business, so I've been fascinated by all these different changes, even like the changes after COVID, as far as how Zoom and online learning and some of these trends have just escalated. They're already happening before COVID, but then the COVID just put it over the roof. E-commerce. I mean, there's a lot of things that are happening that are ultimately going to provide some phenomenal opportunities in the fishing industry as well. So I try to pay attention to all that stuff.
What I know predictions are unpredictable. Like it's very hard to make predictions. I mean, there's so many moving parts, especially in today's society. But I still want to ask you if you could make, especially someone who is you have your own TV show. What are your predictions? Where do you see this going? As far as where are we headed? I don't think television's going anywhere. I think it's just going to be it's always going to be an element. But there's something about the internet, just the fact that you have a TV essentially in your hand now, and you could take it everywhere. So what, someone as a business person, someone who's been in the fishing industry now, you're a veteran, where do you think we're headed?
Well, I think there's a lot of things happening. I think television is going to still be strong. The reason that television is so strong is that it's an older demographic watching it that has some money. Okay, and so if you're a boat manufacturer, if you're selling motors, if you're selling a $3,000 depth finder, whatever it is, that 40-year-old and older is still, a premier prime target, especially, that person that's worked their whole life, their kids are in college or out of college, and okay, now I'm going to do something for myself. You don't have to worry about financing. You don't have to worry about, they can afford it, right? And so that type of demographic, that type of consumer is really important for a lot of companies, for a lot of different, especially the higher price points, okay? And television is one of the best ways to reach those people. I think the biggest thing, though, is I think there's going to be better analytics as far as determining quality of views versus quantity of views. Okay, you take like a product video where you get 2,000 views on YouTube. Okay, is people that are probably buying the product or they've already bought the product and they want to learn how to use it. It's a very high quality view. Whereas you take, the ultimate example, and I hate to use it. Okay, I hate to throw this out here, Greg, but the really hot chick with the breast implants.
Oh yeah,
right. Hardly wearing anything, holding a ass bra, whatever you want to call it. Right.
Right.
100 million views, right? But nobody can remember what the girl was using to catch a fish, right? And that's the first example. But there's quality of views and there's quantity of views, and so sometimes there's outrageous stuff like, I got kicked off of some private property, and the cops, told me I can't stand on this guy's dock, and blah blah blah, drop a few f-bombs, whatever, and it's entertainment, it's outrageous, it's whatever, and it gets all kinds of views. It's clickbait. But it didn't influence a buying decision, okay? And that's probably the biggest differences we're seeing versus like my generation versus, the new guys, they had to reinvent themselves, right? I mean, there wasn't room in the industry for a lot of young people unless they did it different. And so I tip my hat off to some of these successful YouTubers because they figured out their own formula. They figured out something that worked for them. Because if I would have done it the exact same way Tony Dean would have done it, I would have failed. If somebody new coming in would try to do it the exact way I did it, they would fail. You have to come up with your own recipe for success. And you look at, our generation, we made our living off of promoting a product in what you hope is a meaningful way that influences a buying decision. You're getting paid on the backside. Now, I can remember a time when I first started in this career, I would get paid, pretty good money to do a seminar. Okay, 5-6 years into it, you're doing a seminar for free, but then you're getting paid on the backside by a sponsor to be there, and then you're talking about that sponsor's product, integrating that into your seminar. Okay, television's kind of gone through that same transformation where you're getting paid on the backside to integrate a product into your television show, so that way people go and buy that product, and that's how you get paid. The next generation, that formula didn't work for them. Okay, the industry wasn't growing. There's people that were in place that were taking, basically you have 10% of the people taking 90% of the ad budgets of these companies. Okay, so then they had to reinvent themselves again, and basically with Google AdWords and stuff, where their deal was impressions, making it outrageous, funny enough, quirky enough to where people would watch it for the sake of watching it for entertainment value. Okay, so we weren't entertainers, we were educators. To make it today, if you're a young person, you have to be a little bit of an entertainer, okay, because you have to rely on that Google AdWords analytics. And they're starting to get some change to that. I mean, there's people that are, some of the guys are coming out with their own lines of products. There's people that are starting to get some sponsorship opportunities. But again, that's you talk about not using wireless mics. Well, these young people also don't want to see a YouTuber sponsored, right?
Right.
And so they got to be really sly and clever about it too.
Right.
The game is changing, so the younger generation, a lot of times they do have to lean more towards entertaining. It's got to be something that's going to get people's attention and something that's going to watch. And there's different ways to monetize that, right? I mean, obviously you get Google AdWords, you can do some type of light product integration, whatever. But I think probably the biggest thing that we're going to see is I think the marketing platforms in general are going to get a lot more sophisticated as far as determining the quality of impression, in the sense that you don't have to have the biggest fan base. You don't have to have, a million followers. You can have 10,000 followers, but if you have a high batting average and a high conversion rate, especially if you're in a niche market, you can make a living. You look at how different fly fishing can be, from say Great Lakes tribs to say the West Coast, and all the different nuances in different waters. You look at even how regional some of the bass fishing stuff can be. If you can just be an expert and own a niche and make that niche big enough where there's some products being sold, you don't have to change the world. You don't have to, you can have a smaller following if you have a higher batting average. And so I think quality of impression is going to be something I think people are going to be a little bit more sophisticated as far as being able to mark or figure out. And the reason being is that so much stuff is changing to e-commerce, okay, where you can track and see exactly how much you're moving the needle, right? If you do a blog post and you're talking about a new fly reel for West Coast salmon fishing, say north of Vancouver, and 10,000 people read the blog over a year and a half, you can track all that, right? And nobody's buying anything, well, then you know that you're not connecting with people. Whereas say 300 people click in to buy it and 100 of them bought 2 reels, right? And it ends up being a, $15,000 income, well, then you know something worked. And so it's going to get a lot more technical. It's going to get a lot more precise. Historically with television, for example, we'd air a show on TV, tell you approximately how many households that channel is on. But even the raw Nielsen ratings are pretty raw. I mean, at the end of the day, it's smoke and mirrors. I mean, they
for sure.
We buy the airtime and they tell us all these people, well, we don't know, right? Yeah. All we know is that on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever product we were talking about or using, it was sold out in, say, 4 major box retailers. And then the reorders came in. We could see how big the purchase orders were. But it's still, a lot of blue sky. I mean, you're just looking at, 10,000 foot view. Whereas with the e-commerce element, especially, things are going to get a lot more technical. You know exactly what works, what doesn't work. You know exactly who the players are and who the frauds are. Yeah. The deal of faking it till you make it is going to be a lot harder when you can see it, when it's there time. Yeah. So I think, those are some of the changes that I see coming down the pipeline.
Do you, kind of changing, shifting more to from the media side to just the fishing side of things? What trends do you see? What big trends could be in multi-species or just specifically more walleye or really any kind of fishing? What trends do you see kind of happening that have kind of that you're noticing? Big trends kind of happening in the industry.
Well, there's a lot of trends happening simultaneously. I think one of the trends we're seeing is that maybe some under the radar fishing opportunities are cool again, right? I mean, if I had to start all over and say if I was a 16-year-old person aspiring to be on YouTube or whatever, I wouldn't try to be the next Kevin Van Dam or the next Jordan Lee. I wouldn't try to be the next Al Linder. I would, look at under the radar opportunities right in my backyard on rivers, fishing from shore, things that are accessible, anybody can do. And some of it is just sensationalism, right? I mean, something is trash until somebody makes it cool. You look at the channel catfishing on the Red River. When I was a kid growing up, Red River was this dirty brown river and nobody paid the time of day to it. And then all of a sudden some guides started popping up and doing some stuff and, kind of made it cool, right? Catching all these big fish. It's like, you do it, and it's fun. And it's like, wow, and so, carp can be that. Suckers can be that. I mean, just, there's got to be some sensationalism to make something cool, something coveted so that people want to do it and then obviously buy the equipment to do it. So I think some of that under the radar, underappreciated stuff is going to rise to the forefront. 50 years from now, not everybody can be hung up on walleyes. There's just not enough walleye water, and they taste too good, so people want to keep them and eat them, and a lot of times people are using live bait, so they swallow, so you have higher angling mortality. You look at some of the high school fishing leagues, for example, the bass fishing stuff is going to keep getting bigger. I mean, bass fishing always had a following in Minnesota, but 25 years ago, it was way, way smaller and way better than it is now.
Right.
Some of these bass lakes, some of these, they're starting to resemble stuff you see in Texas. Some of it, they're starting to get some pressure.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
We got to work a little harder, right? But it's getting a lot more popular. I think the bass thing is going to continue to grow. And then you look at like the zebra mussels and stuff, cleaning up some water, whereas, some of these smallmouth populations continue to expand in some of these lakes where they're always there. 10 years from now, Leech Lake might be the next Mille Lacs. So there's some trends that way that we're seeing. As far as technology and stuff, what I find is that most people that buy the technology still don't know how to use it. It's kind of a double-edged sword. So if you can afford to have all these bells and whistles, you got to work pretty hard to pay for it. Okay, well then you're not on the water. Okay, and if you have all the time in the world and you're fishing all the time, well, you probably don't afford to buy the newest stuff, right? And so it's kind of the catch-22. And so I don't know if technology is really as big of a it accelerates a learning curve. It used to be where somebody would spend their whole life learning a lake and getting really good at fishing, whereas now I see people really good at fishing in 3, 4, 5 years. The learning curve is pretty dramatic. Lake master chips and, all this stuff, right? Side imaging, whatever. You can figure all this stuff in a hurry. There's a lot more information out there now. It used to be where people were pretty tight-lipped. If you wanted to know something, you had to put in the time. Now you can YouTube anything and get pretty good information. There is obviously the kind of the age-old deal where knowing when and what to do and where to do it, right? Not everybody has that figured out, but I think I still think though there's a lot of stones left unturned. I think there's still a lot of secrets left. I think there's new stuff to figure out all the time. I see that sometimes, I hear it sometimes where people say, "Oh, there's nothing new in fishing." I'm just the early '90s, when planer boards came out, all this stuff was brand new. Well, there's all kinds of new stuff. Right. You're just not thinking hard. You're falling into a rut,
right?
And I can tell you, as I get older, the older I get, the harder it is to do that. I remember being 20 years old, anything that was new coming out of the, I remember having GPS and all this stuff. You're like, oh, you don't need that. I've been fishing this lake my whole life. It's pretty handy. Before the map chips, right?
Oh, yeah. I remember. It's so funny you bring that up because I remember that time. I remember specifically seeing a GPS unit, seeing the lake, right? The first, one of the first GPS units, and it was the lake. And then it would show you where you are on the lake, but there was no topography.
Yeah.
And I remember going, you know what? It would be so awesome if they could lay a topography on the lake then, you know? And that was some revolutionary thing to have and sure enough, it wasn't long after that. But I remember I've been doing this for so long. I've been eat up with fishing for so long that I remember when GPS maps on a graph did not have topography.
Yeah, well, I can even remember when they didn't even have the lake outlined. You know?
Loran Sea.
In the positioning was terrible, where you'd drift and then you'd kind of disappear. Then you'd have to run back up ahead of your marker buoy and drift through again to see where you're at, you know. And yeah, and you know, I mean, that stuff's just keep getting better and easier. The learning curve's accelerating, but you know, I know there's still so much stuff out there that's new, that's different, you know, and even like shallow water, you know, especially, you know, you look at like less than 10 feet of water, that's still the most unknown water on the lake, right? Because the stuff is subtle. It doesn't pop up on like a mid-lake reef. Yeah, every contour map's going to have it, but a little dip in the sand where it goes from phase 5 feet to 7 feet, there's a little bit of rock and a little bit of cabbage over here. You know, that stuff still doesn't pop out yet.
Right.
Pop to you on a map. You know? So, yeah, I mean, there's always stuff.
As a multi-species angler, you know, you fish for bass, you fish for walleye. I see it. You know, I film a ton of professional bass fishing tournaments. I see techniques, and I felt this way. I mean, I've filmed a ton of bass. I've filmed a ton of walleye through the years. I see techniques that would work. I see walleye techniques that are just. And the thing about fishing is really interesting too. Is it gets so segmented. You know, there could be anglers that are just so like into walleyes, anglers that are just so into bass. There isn't communication, like they're their own cultures, right? Yeah. And fishing's really unique in that way, I feel like, as compared to other sports. They're so varied. And so in bass fishing and in tournament fishing, I've seen techniques that would really, like walleye techniques that I think would work really well in bass fishing. And in bass fishing, I've seen really, you know, awesome techniques that I think would work really well in walleye fishing. One of those, and I think this is so funny, this is a great example, Lake Oahe and the spinnerbait deal, okay? Mm-hmm. And trolling spinnerbaits through the timber. Like someone had to lose 1 billion crankbaits before they realized maybe there's a lure that's more weedless.
Yeah.
You know, and Devil's Lake's another great example of that. All the timber, all the flooded stuff. Do you see anything that's kind of like in your fishing that, wow, you know, this is something that only walleye guys are doing that would be great for bass fishing, or, you know, or vice versa. Do you see anything like that?
Oh yeah, there's so many similarities, right? But they just call it a different name. You know, it's you know, like the video fishing, right? You know, down in the Ozarks, you know, they might be using spoons. You could use a jigging raft. You look at a live bait rig, well, Carolina rig, right? I mean, it's, you know, and then swim baits and stuff. I mean, it's amazing how walleye anglers and bass anglers are doing remarkably similar things, but they just have different lingo, you know, different language, different, you know, some types, different baits, whatever, but it's the same thing. I mean, and that's the thing about it is you do any bass fishing, you're going to catch walleyes on accident. You do any walleye fishing where there's bass, you're going to catch bass on accident, you know. And so, yeah, I follow the bass stuff a lot just because I feel like, especially in the high-end tournaments, you know, this is such a different caliber of angler. It's just such more competitive. It's just faster horses on the track, and so understanding current, for example, understanding offshore structure, understanding electronics. You know, a lot of that comes out in the bass scene earlier than it does the walleye scene. Maybe just more anglers, higher level of competition, whatever. But I pay attention to the bass stuff a lot because I feel like I can learn a lot more. I feel like, you know, doing as much bass fishing as you can makes you a better walleye angler. Doing a lot of walleye fishing makes you a better bass angler, you know. And so, I mean, I think most walleye anglers would do really good in a smallmouth tournament, for example. You know, where there's boat control, offshore structure, you're not throwing at something on the bank, you got to fish something you can't see that you have to use your electronics for. I think most walleye anglers would probably do pretty well with that, you know. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of crossover and a lot that you can learn.
I think one of the good examples of crossover that I think would work really well from the walleye world to the bass fishing world is the slow death technique, where it's very subtle. You have it kind of on a bottom bouncer, it's on a bottom bouncer, and then you have that. You have that bent hook that gives that crawler that twist, and you could use a half a crawler. You're supposed to use a half a crawler, but you can use a plastic imitation. I just think there's times, like walleye or smallmouth fishing, and even largemouth fishing, when they're being super finicky, that could be a great technique. And just so the people that are watching the video podcast know, we're changing up angles of Jason, because we've up in North Dakota, they don't have a lot of cell phones. That's why your cell service. That's why North Dakota is so great, and the fishing's so great, is you have less population up there. I'm just kidding. Yep. Of course, there's, but yeah, go into that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the major differences, though, especially with bass tournaments, is obviously you can't troll, you can't move the boat and drag something below or behind the boat, But that's not to say that you couldn't modify some type of, even like a Tokyo rig with a hook that turns, with slow death type action, which, again, there are some jig heads, roller jig heads that are kind of like that right now, that have kind of the hinged hook, so, there is a lot of probably more crossover than what people think. But, whenever you do a lot of fishing, even like fishing steelhead, right? Or, fishing, any type of a river fish, for example, it makes you a better walleye angler, learning to mend fly line, right? You understand current seems better for when you're walleye fishing. And so anytime you can do any type of fishing, especially with a really astute angler, Great Lakes trolling for salmon, right? And understanding thermoclines and understanding a cool water pelagic bait fish make you a better walleye angler, and so anytime that you can cross over into a deep dive in any type of realm of fishing, whenever you go back to your core species or your core experience, it's gonna put you further ahead in my opinion. Great Lakes fishing, for example, the current is so obvious. And then when you come back on a lake like Mille Lacs or Devil's Lake, you think, there's current here too. I just didn't realize it, right? All those experiences add to your understanding of an ecosystem, to your understanding of presentations, to how fish react, and so it's all valuable. That's why I like to fish for different species. I figure that I learn so much more. And there's also the interaction between species. Walleyes interacting and reacting to carp. Sometimes on reservoirs, if you start catching channel cats, the walleyes are somewhere close, or smallmouths, the walleyes are somewhere close. They might not be on the exact spot on the spot, but they're within 100 yards of you. Yep. There's a lot of things that you can learn and take from other species, other fishing experiences.
You bring up the carp deal. I've witnessed, and I've never seen this before. I witnessed it at a bass tournament a couple of years ago, a couple summers ago, I guess now, in upstate New York. Very clear body water, natural body water, and there were carp, quite a few carp, not a ton of carp, but you'd see one or two on the cruise in the flats near the shoreline, and yep. Smallmouth were following the carp.
Yeah.
Smallmouth were following right behind the carp. The carp would uproot stuff.
Yep.
And the smallmouth would be right there to, I guess, anything really, but I imagine it was crayfish that they'd get the crayfish all uprooted, and the crayfish would take off, and the smallmouth would eat it. But anything that the alive that the carp were rooting up, and the critters were escaping, the smallmouth were right behind, like a remora on a shark, very similar.
Yeah. Yep. Very. Yeah. So there's a lot of neat stuff that you just pick up by, just broadening your horizons, So and I think too with the internet, so I think there's a lot more I think there's more multi-species anglers,
right.
Especially in the upper Midwest, where they're following the bass scene, they're following the walleye scene, and I think that things aren't going to be as isolated as they used to. It used to be where things would be isolated for decades, now, there's just such a, I guess we'd call it enough. I think that line's going to get a lot more. I think it's reaches tactics at time for things structured quickly.
Yeah. Well, what we're looks like your signal might be coming back now a little bit better, but I've already taken up way too much of your time, Jason. You're super generous with your time. I really appreciate it, dude. I owe you big time. I could talk to you forever and ever. And honestly, I don't want to.
I enjoy talking to you too.
I don't want to waste your time here. But if I do, I'm such a newbie. I got a new boat recently. And I've been going down last couple of weeks down on Pool 2, which is of the Mississippi River. I'm sure you're familiar with Pool 2. So could you give a newbie to Pool 2 like myself with this new boat? I got this 18-foot multi-species boat now. What the hell can, this time of year, how should I be following? How should I be fishing for walleyes? What advice could you give me there?
Well, a lot of it's classic current seams. I like to pitch plastics a lot, at least to find fish and to figure out read the water. Thing about river fish is you have to be nimble, and you can't get caught up on where you caught them yesterday. Things change by the hour, and the flow changes by the hour. Your ground speed obviously isn't going to do you much good. Okay. And so what I like to do is use my trolling motor to gauge the current to try to put the pattern together. Like if I have my trolling motor on, say, 4, and I can creep upstream at, say, 0.3, 0.4 miles an hour, that might be the sweet spot. I get in a little bit different spot, and all of a sudden on 4, I'm going backwards with the current still, or I can only hold you use your trolling motor to gauge that current seam or the velocity of the current, and then try to put that pattern together that way. Earlier on, sometimes you'll still find fish in the deep holes and the troughs and that slow water stuff. And then, when the water warms up, especially, you'll start seeing fish move up shallow, especially when the sun starts to feel warm. I love to pitch shallow, and finding shallow current seams. I find that a lot of times the fish aren't in completely slack water, but they're right on the edge of it. They still like to sit where they can let stuff blow by them, and then obviously you get into the spawn, and then you get in a period after the spawn where, a lot of times it's water temperature, and so I like to watch my temperature gauge this time of year and really pay attention to that. If you can find water somewhere that's a degree warmer, pay attention, look for warmth, look for, I like to cover water by casting. And the other thing too is that there's a mentality that you use the lightest jig that you can. How often have you ever heard that, Greg? Use the lightest line that you can, use the lightest that you can. When you're trying to put the day together, because every day is different, when you're trying to put the day together on a river, don't hesitate to use the heaviest jig that you can, because you get luckier. In the sense that, say you're in 12 feet of water and you're casting up into some slack water, and you're using, say, a 3/16 jig, which is perfect for that slack water. Well, then it comes back below the boat and it gets on the other side of the seam, and you're a little bit faster water and drops down to 12, maybe 14 feet, right? And you just get blown right off of that, where there could have been fish laying on that, but you'll never know it because you didn't touch it. Okay. Don't use a 3/8, use a quarter, right? Use something that's, don't be afraid to go up a size or two when you're trying to figure out the day, because then you can fish a lot. You can do a lot of things wrong if you're in the right place at the right time, right? But if you're, on current, especially if you're getting blown way up off the bottom, when you're coming back through that faster water, that deeper water, sometimes those fish are there, but you'll never know it if you're using too light of a jig. Okay.
No kidding.
When you use the lightest jig you can after you find the fish, use the heaviest jig you can to find them.
Well, dude, I'll let you get on your way. You've been really, really generous with your time, and we've had some technical difficulties, and I appreciate you being patient with all this, man. What's that?
I'm kind of used to technical difficulties.
No worries, man. I honest to God, I really appreciate you taking your time, to do this podcast. I mean, we're a little boutique podcast, It's not like we've got this huge audience. I'm very happy with the audience we have. We're growing, but just the fact that you would take your time and talk to this knucklehead right here, it means a lot to me, and I owe you one, brother.
Hey, I always enjoy our conversations. I'll have to get out fishing sometime, man. I
would love it, Jason. Take care, and you're welcome whenever you have any time to come on another fishing podcast again, my friend.
Love it, man. Always enjoy spending time with you, man.